Growing up, I quickly discovered that storing food was a bit like playing hide and seek, except the potatoes were always the ones hiding, and not very well. For example, there was a time I thought it'd be clever to stash some potatoes under my kitchen sink. It seemed like a cozy little spot where they'd be perfectly content. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and I opened the cabinet to an unpleasant odor and some green, sprouting lumps that barely resembled the potatoes I'd stored. That's when I realized my version of potato storage was more like pre-composting. Turns out, storing potatoes properly is an art, a skill that the Amish have perfected, and they've done it without modern gadgets or climate-controlled cellars. After a few failed attempts of my own, I was ready to learn their secrets. I used to think potatoes were practically invincible, like nature's version of canned food that could last forever. Just toss them in a cupboard, right? Oh, how wrong I was. While potatoes are certainly hardy, they come with a few quirks that need the right touch if you want them to last. Funny enough, potatoes are about 80% water, which explains why they so quickly turn into mush if left neglected. But if you treat them right, these starchy powerhouses can stay fresh for up to 8 months, retaining their flavor and nutrition the whole time. Honestly, I can't even keep the same box of cereal for that long. The truth is, potatoes were practically built to endure. These tubers thrive in the dark, don't mind sharing space with others, and don't need fancy refrigeration. Just avoid letting them get too cold, and they're good to go. Their resilience makes sense when you consider their origin, the Andes Mountains, where their wild relatives still grow in rugged, rocky terrain. The Amish respect this hardiness, treating potatoes not as fragile items, but as dependable staples that, with a bit of care, can be stored for months without worry. And since potatoes are loaded with vitamins and fiber, they're like a built-in survival kit straight from nature. But mastering the art of potato storage didn't come naturally to me. I remember once leaving a bag of potatoes on my sunny kitchen windowsill, thinking the sunlight might do them good. Within days, little sprouts had started popping up, and the skins began to look wrinkled and strange. Somehow, I'd managed to transform my potatoes into a botched science experiment. Unlike a garden, these sprouting horrors weren't charming. They were growing uncontrollably, turning an alarming shade of green. Little did I know at the time, this green hue wasn't just unappealing. It was a sign of toxic compounds called solanine. Leave it to me to take one of the most resilient foods on the planet and ruin it in a way that would make any experienced farmer shake their head. The Amish, on the other hand, don't take chances when it comes to storing potatoes. They've mastered the art of keeping them in safe, cool, and dark environments, places where there's no temptation for potatoes to sprout, turn green, or shrivel up like neglected raisins. Basements and cellars are their go-to spots because these areas naturally offer the right balance of temperature and humidity. And why not? Potatoes have been a cheap, nutritious staple for generations, helping our ancestors survive harsh winters long before refrigeration was even a concept. By keeping potatoes away from light and in the cool comfort of a dark cellar, the Amish make long-term storage look effortless. I used to think root cellars were the stuff of scary stories, dark underground spaces where who knows what might be lurking. But it turns out a root cellar isn't a creepy dungeon. It's a brilliant, time-tested method for preserving food, especially potatoes. It's amazing how such a simple setup can keep vegetables fresh for months without needing a single modern appliance. Meanwhile, most of us are running to Google to figure out how to stop our produce from spoiling before our next grocery trip. The concept is so straightforward, it's almost laughable. Find a cool, dark, and slightly damp spot, and voila! You've got the perfect environment for storing potatoes. The Amish use root cellars because they naturally maintain a consistent temperature, typically between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which potatoes love. It's like an underground spa retreat for tubers. While the rest of us might panic if our Wi-Fi signal drops, the Amish have calmly relied on this method for centuries, no matter the season or weather. How long have root cellars been around? Let's just say they date back to the Middle Ages. No exaggeration, our ancestors were using these underground storage spaces centuries ago, and they've withstood everything from famines to the invention of modern refrigerator freezers. No upgrades, no fancy gadgets, just pure practicality. The secret to their success lies in maintaining the perfect temperature. Too warm and potatoes will sprout or, worse, start to rot. Too cold, and the starches convert to sugar, giving them a strange, overly sweet taste. But in a root cellar, the earth acts as a natural thermostat, keeping everything in that just right range. Imagine it, an underground hideaway where potatoes enjoy what's essentially a five-star hotel stay. Ideal temperatures, no harsh light, and perfectly balanced air. A lot of people assume you need fans, vents, or high-tech devices to create this kind of environment. The Amish, though, achieve it with nothing more than a simple dark room, a touch of dampness, and centuries of know-how. While many of us fill our kitchens with storage gadgets, special containers, and apps to remind us when food is going bad, the Amish simply place their potatoes in a root cellar and move on with their day. It's hard not to wonder if we're overcomplicating things. The Amish can keep potatoes fresh for months without breaking a sweat, while the rest of us struggle to keep them edible for a couple of weeks. By then, our stored potatoes often resemble something out of a science experiment, rotting, sprouting, or turning into a mushy, foul-smelling mess. Speaking of practical solutions, we wholeheartedly recommend a book by Claude Davis, a seasoned prepper, that delves into 126 superfoods and preservation methods from crisis times like the Great Depression and wartime. This knowledge is becoming increasingly rare, and we're one of the last generations able to pass these invaluable techniques on to our children or grandchildren. Losing this information about nutrient-packed foods and time-tested preservation methods would be a tragedy. Now here's a fun experiment. Leave a bag of potatoes in a dark cabinet for a few weeks without touching it. When you finally open it, you might be greeted by a sour, musty smell. Or, if you're particularly unlucky, a damp, spongy pile of what used to be potatoes. I learned this lesson the hard way after forgetting about a bag in my pantry. Mold thrives in stagnant conditions, which is why the Amish ventilation method is genius. The Amish know that while potatoes need some moisture, they also need proper airflow to avoid turning into a moldy disaster. They've mastered the delicate balance of humidity and ventilation, relying on natural airflow rather than mechanical intervention. Fresh air might seem like an old-school solution, but the Amish prove it's all you need to store potatoes properly. Instead of relying on electric fans or high-tech ventilation systems, they use natural airflow to manage moisture levels. It's a simple yet effective approach, especially when modern folks might think they need a mini HVAC setup in their basement just to avoid the soggy mess I once found in my pantry. With the right ventilation, the Amish maintain a cool, dark, and balanced environment in their root cellars, making it nearly impossible for mold to take hold. And here's a fascinating fact. Potatoes store best at around 85 to 95% humidity. This delicate balance prevents them from drying out and shriveling while ensuring they don't turn into a mushy disaster. Opening a window or allowing a gentle breeze sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Yet in today's gadget-obsessed world, the idea of relying on fresh air to prevent mold seems almost outdated. The Amish, however, treat it like an art form. They know that by giving their potatoes a cozy, airy environment, they can keep them fresh for months. No fancy devices, no constant monitoring, just low-effort, highly effective storage. While many of us rely on air purifiers, dehumidifiers, or even apps to track the state of our potatoes, the Amish let nature do the work. Their potatoes stay firm and mold-free without any modern tech, allowing them to go about their day without worrying about moldy surprises in their cellar. Light, the potato villain. Light can do wonders for your mood, help houseplants thrive, and of course, make for great selfies. But for potatoes, it's their worst enemy. Even a little exposure to light can trigger sprouting, turning them green and bitter. My first attempt at potato storage involved leaving them on a sunny windowsill, thinking they'd benefit from some natural light. What I ended up with was a tray of mutant sprouting tubers that looked ready to star in a sci-fi film. Light exposure not only causes potatoes to sprout like crazy, but it also turns them green, thanks to a compound called solanine. This chemical doesn't just taste bitter, it can be mildly toxic in large amounts. The Amish understand this better than anyone. They keep their potatoes in complete darkness, ensuring they stay firm, unsprouted, and perfectly edible for months. Science backs up their method. Research shows that even minimal light exposure can lead to sprouting and greening, which quickly dehydrates the potato and leaves it bitter and shriveled. By storing their potatoes in dark, cool spaces, the Amish avoid these issues altogether. It's a bit ironic. While the world rushes to embrace solar energy, the Amish are busy protecting their potatoes from even a hint of sunlight. After my green potato fiasco, I've adopted their strategy, designating a dark corner of my basement as my potato safe haven. No stray sunlight will ruin my dinner plans again because, trust me, green potatoes might be eco-friendly, but they're definitely not dinner table friendly. Timing is everything. Timing isn't just key in comedy, it's critical for potatoes too. While most of us grab veggies when they look good enough to eat, the Amish know that harvesting potatoes too early is a recipe for disaster. Immature potatoes may look small and delicate, but they're fragile and poor candidates for storage. Potatoes reach their full storage potential only when they're fully mature. Thick, tough skins act as natural armor, keeping out rot, moisture, and pests for the long haul. In fact, studies show that potatoes harvested at the right time are up to 50% more likely to store well. I learned this lesson the hard way after an overly enthusiastic attempt at gardening. I eagerly dug up my crop, expecting plump, delicious potatoes. Instead, I uncovered a batch of underdeveloped spuds that shriveled up almost immediately. It was a humbling moment that made me appreciate the Amish practice of patience when it comes to harvest time. When I first started growing potatoes, I was thrilled to dig into my garden and unearth what I thought would be plump, ready-to-eat spuds. Instead, I pulled out what looked more like oversized marbles, maybe golf balls on a good day. Turns out, harvesting potatoes too soon is a classic rookie mistake. If you're impatient like I was, you end up with underdeveloped little nuggets that are not only a chore to peel, but also shrivel up within weeks, as if they've had a taste of freedom and rejected it entirely. The Amish don't fall into this trap. They know the secret is in the timing. They wait until the potato plants have completely withered, the vines browned, the leaves dried and crinkled. That's the signal the underground tubers are fully mature, with thick skins that act like armor, keeping moisture in and decay out. It's not just tradition, it's solid science. Mature potatoes are hardier and better equipped for long-term storage. While I was out there eagerly yanking up my tiny spuds, the Amish were likely enjoying a bounty of robust, storage-ready potatoes. Their patience pays off, and they've learned to trust the natural process. There's a lesson in there somewhere, maybe about not rushing things or letting nature take its course. But let's be real, it's a hard pill to swallow when you're staring at a pile of shriveled, useless potatoes. Gentle handling, the key to longevity. For a vegetable that seems rugged, potatoes are surprisingly fragile when it comes to storage. A single bump or careless toss can trigger a cascade of spoilage. The Amish, however, have mastered the art of gentle handling. Unlike me, who once thought a sack of potatoes could be tossed around like a bag of laundry, they treat each one like a priceless heirloom. Why? Because bruises are the silent saboteurs of potato storage. Even the tiniest ding can create a weak spot, inviting rot, mold, and pests to move in. That's why the Amish handle their potatoes with care, from harvest to storage. They don't yank potatoes out of the ground like pulling weeds. Instead, they use a tool called a potato fork. Its wide, flat prongs make it easy to dig up potatoes without puncturing or bruising them. Once unearthed, each potato is inspected, gently cleaned, and placed carefully into storage, never dropped or roughly tossed. This level of care ensures their harvest lasts well into the following year. Compare that to my early attempts at handling produce. I've bruised more apples and squished more tomatoes than I'd like to admit. But when I decided to try the Amish method, treating potatoes like a delicate new phone, it was a game changer. Not only did my potatoes last much longer, but the simple act of handling them gently brought an unexpected sense of pride and satisfaction. It's funny, really. When you respect your food, it almost feels like it respects you back. Treating potatoes with care doesn't just preserve them. It transforms the entire experience of growing, harvesting, and storing them into something meaningful. There's a kind of quiet joy in knowing you've done it right, all thanks to a little patience and a gentle touch. Most people today seem to treat their phones with more care than their groceries. Drop a potato? No big deal, right? But the moment your phone gets the slightest scratch, it's practically a national emergency. The Amish would probably find this pretty amusing. For them, careful handling isn't about protecting something expensive. It's about respecting the food that sustains them. Maybe next time we're juggling bags of groceries, we should remember to handle them with the same care we reserve for our gadgets. After all, a well-stored potato can keep you fed for months, while a dropped phone, well, you know how that story ends. The secret step most ignore: curing potatoes. Here's a trick the Amish rely on that many of us overlook: curing potatoes. It sounds like something reserved for fancy chefs, but it's actually a straightforward, old-school process. After harvesting, the Amish let their potatoes rest in a warm, dry spot for a few days. This allows the skins to toughen up, sealing in moisture and providing a natural defense against rot and mold. Who knew potatoes could benefit from a little R&R? While the Amish are busy prepping their spuds for months of storage, the rest of us are tossing them straight into a cupboard, only to be surprised when they sprout or shrivel a week later. The Amish don't use fans or any high-tech gadgets for this step. They simply place their potatoes in a well-ventilated spot like a barn or shed, and nature takes care of the rest. This curing process takes about a week, but it drastically improves the potato's storage life. Think of it as the potato toughening up for the months ahead, like putting on a winter coat. I didn't always get this right. My first attempt at curing involved setting the potatoes by a sunny window, which only resulted in them turning green and sprouting like they'd found the fountain of sunlight. It turns out warmth and dryness are the keys, and light is the enemy. Now that I've learned how to properly cure potatoes, I treat them with the respect they deserve. No more tossing them in the pantry without a second thought. An unwelcome visitor. Lessons in potato storage. A few years ago, I reached into my pantry for a potato and instead locked eyes with a very surprised mouse. After an embarrassing amount of shouting on my part and calm indifference on the mouse's part, I managed to scare it off. But the damage was done. It had nibbled its way through some of my best spuds. The Amish, on the other hand, don't have this problem. Their potatoes are stored in what I can only describe as a rodent-proof fortress. Their secret? Straw. Lining potato bins with straw creates a natural barrier that insects and rodents find less inviting. The straw also absorbs excess moisture, making the environment less appealing to pests that thrive in damp conditions. It's such a simple, ingenious solution. While most of us are stocking up on pest repellents and calling in professionals, the Amish are using basic, natural materials to protect their harvest. No chemicals, no gadgets, just resourcefulness. It makes you wonder why we overcomplicate things. A kinder, simpler approach. The Amish approach to pest control is a gentle reminder that sometimes the simplest methods work best. Instead of cluttering our homes with traps and sprays, a few natural materials like straw or herbs can go a long way. It's not only better for the potatoes, but also for the environment, and frankly, for our peace of mind. With the Amish method, there's no need to worry about mold, rot, or tiny invaders. It's a low-tech, high-reward solution that leaves your storage area tidy and your potatoes in great shape. Full circle, embracing Amish simplicity. In my journey to master potato storage, I've gone from trying every modern method to simply placing them in a dark, well-ventilated corner. And you know what? It works. So next time you're thinking about how to store potatoes, remember the Amish wisdom. Keep it simple, keep it natural, and maybe even have a little fun with it. After all, the goal is to keep your potatoes fresh. not turn them into a science experiment.